Hey, what is up, PMC fam? It has been far too long. I missed y'all, and I know Simon missed y'all. We missed y'all is the short story here, but we are back to cover flag football in full force here. I am your host for this episode, Kodey Stauffer. Be sure to double back to Coach V's episodes earlier this week, and we're going to keep the previews rolling as we get more information, as we get closer to the season, talking about college flag football and expanding our coverage dramatically here in order to give you, the listeners, and the people, the athletes, the coaches, everyone who's working so hard to grow this game that continues to grow at a rapid pace, their flowers and covering it all properly as we can. So I got 3 programs today. I'm going to talk a little bit about their history, if they got it. If not, some of the players that they have coming in, what we were able to find on them, where they're from, the coach, and all of that good stuff. One such program that is brand new here is going to be Ferrum College here. They are new in the flag football scene, and they are going to be competing in the Conference Carolina's Division II level. And I think that for our returning listeners is going to be part of the switch up here, is that we will be covering the D2 level here, as well as D3s, as well as JUCOs a little bit, and expand our rankings and the way that they are ranked and who gets to rank as well, which I think is going to be a fun surprise for y'all once we get into that. But anyways, back to Ferrum here. You know, they are coming in and they are led by Garrett Roth, who is actually a CSU alumni. So I bet we're going to start seeing some Colorado athletes on this squad sooner rather than later, I'd assume. But that is not currently really what their roster is comprised of at this time here. And so with that being said, we're going to take a look at the roster. Obviously, the majority of this is going to be freshman presence, okay, and kind of seeing how things fall into place here. Now, we do have a little bit of information as far as Ferrum. They won the NCFFL Fall Classic Tournament. This is a growing tournament for college flag football in the fall, and it's one that Ferrum came out, won, with Kaylee Jacobs winning MVP of said tournament here. So that's kind of her start as far as what she's bringing to this football team. And you know, maybe trying to set some high expectations here for the Panthers out here. And by the way, I should mention that this school is out east in Virginia as well, so that's obviously going to impact some of the recruits that we are going to see as we go through this. But anyhow, kind of just going through this roster, trying to give as many people their flowers that have stats or things to look back at or whatever. You know, this roster, it is a sizable roster, I will say, especially for a first-year program. I think that that's really important to make sure that you have depth and just players, honestly, because we've seen some rosters with some very small numbers here. And for a first-year program to come in with over 20 players, that ensures just depth, honestly, more than anything, because we've seen seasons cut short in the past here. So I like the time and diligence being put together here by Coach Garrett Roth. He has some experience across a few different places, but the main one that we noticed, or that I took note of here, is that he is the former coach of Cordova High School out in California. But moving along back into this roster here, Star Ramos was one of the first ones to really catch my eye, just with the versatility that she was displaying for San Gorgonio, I want to say is how you say that high school. Some of the stats that I was able to find on her, she played a little bit of quarterback here, going 48 of 97 for 671 yards, 8 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. but primarily looked to be devastating at receiver, racking up 579 yards and 8 touchdowns as a senior here. She also notched 53 tackles and 10 interceptions with 22 pass deflections here for this squad. So look for Star Ramos to try and make an impact here, currently listed at wide receiver and running back. You also got Skylar Keeve here, who is a solid receiver with good ball skills and attacks the ball. Was able to watch some of her highlights on her Instagram, and she is out of Tacoma, Washington. So that is an interesting development here. Getting a player all the way from the Northwest to travel all the way across the country and try and play some flag football. You also have Brianna Kimmins, I want to say, or Kimmins. Let's go with Kimmins here. And if that's wrong or any of these names are wrong, feel free to reach out to us and let us know in the DMs at Playmakers Corner on Instagram. But at McClatchy High School in Sacramento, she had 181 total touches, that's rushes and receptions here, for 2,011 yards and 32 offensive touchdowns. However, the damage was mainly as a receiver, and you can see that same hand work, attacking the football work on the defensive side of the ball, where she has 13 recorded interceptions and 9 total pass deflections here. The next notable player here that I found was a little newspaper article of some kind on Miracle Turner, who's a 4-year starter at safety and receiver out of Brunswick, Georgia, before coming up. And Georgia is one of those states that does have it sanctioned. And I know that list is only going to continue to grow. So if you don't have high school flag football sanctioned in your state, make sure to push for it, because there are great athletes everywhere, and we want all of these athletes to compete at the highest level and continue to grow the game. I digress, as I'm known to do, but moving along out of New Jersey, we have Dayana Mackey here, has some club experience, was able to see some highlights at linebacker and rusher. Okay, pretty sure flag puller, as well as playing the ball and just moving around the field, and seems to communicate pretty darn well. We also have Genesis Hernandez here. Took note on her as she could be potentially the starting quarterback, honestly. She has some interesting clips on Field Level, which is this platform that I have been using to watch a little bit of film here and there. And she's got a solid ball placement going for her. She tries to put the ball where her receivers are going and not where they've been, which is obviously kind of the first thing that you want to see. And I think that she could potentially compete for the starting quarterback spot here. The next athlete here that I'm looking at is Payson Shreve out of Gilbert, Arizona, who played for Highland High School. She was at quarterback, going 232 for 333 attempts on 2,435 yards and 6 touchdowns, but a lot of interceptions. Maybe not what they are potentially looking for, but, still listed at quarterback and safety. Could see her compete for that position. But, in flag football, there's a lot of moving of positions, and she's also 5'11", which is pretty darn tall, and it would be hard, at least for me, to not consider at all potentially using her at a skill position spot. Or obviously, if you have multiple quarterback sets, that is something that you can kind of open up here. So Shreve and Hernandez are kind of the two athletes I'm looking at to compete for that quarterback spot as of now. There are other listed quarterbacks, however, like Malaya Lotimatanga here out of San Fernando Valley out in California, who played for Birmingham High School. So she is the other listed quarterback here, but we will see who ends up winning that job. I'm going to be very intrigued and excited to see who pulls that out. Other players with stats or just notables here, Cariel Turner recorded 75 receptions for 848 yards and 7 touchdowns across her 2 years of high school play, in addition to 6 interceptions and 107 tackles. She is out of Las Vegas. This been a flag football state, so no real surprises here. You have Danilin Bonilla out of Quartz Hills High School in California. So another California recruit here for Ferrum. Very California heavy, honestly, for this squad, which is very interesting, going across the country and being able to recruit in some ways like that. But obviously, he was able to build some connections being at Cordova High School. So, he's kind of had his ear to the ground out there in the flag football scene. But back to Bonilla here, 71 receptions, 871 yards, and 9 touchdowns, as well as 6 interceptions across 2 years of high school play. Another notable player here, Samantha Pitzer, is listed as captain, so that'll be interesting to see how she leads this team and just kind of how these, freshmen, for the most part, are going to feed off of each other heading into this season. You also have Jordan Snell here, who had 102 receptions for 920 yards and 9 touchdowns her senior year, as well as 4 interceptions and 12 pass deflections. Jaden Heers, who had 135 receptions for 2,429 yards and 49 touchdowns in 22 games. I didn't believe it when I first saw it. Had to read a newspaper article here, and that is how she was laying it down out in Cali. So she is going to be one of the prominent, if not the leading receiver potentially for the Panthers this upcoming season. And then finally, on the roster that I was able to find stuff on was Zanala Hatcher-Simmons here, 70 tackles and 7 picks as a senior. So that is Ferrum's roster. I know that was kind of long-winded. It's not a lot of familiar names for people who've been listening to us like there are going to be for the other programs I'm covering in this episode here. But nonetheless, it is who we are covering and looking at, so I'm glad that we were able to take a look at all of these. Now, turning our attention towards the season here, they are going to open up their season on February 28th, which is a Saturday. I'm assuming that 1 p.m. start time is going to be Eastern here, and they are playing against Hollins University here. Then we move along. We have a more familiar name in Lindsey Wilson on February 28th, and then Milligan on March 4th here. Now, I think that a couple of these opening games could potentially be toss-ups here as far as what to expect in the wins and losses columns. But I have a pretty strong feeling here that even if they are able to pick up those first 2 wins, I don't think that against the silver bracket champion of last year, Milligan, that experienced so much growth from their young players, even with a couple of injuries coming into the season here, they are still probably the superior team. So I think at best they start off 2-1 here before getting a chance at North Carolina Central here, which is a little close. And then they host Milligan once again in the month of March here. And so I think at best you're looking at 3-2 here, but could be looking at, I think that they probably pull out one of these games that they have, considering how their fall went. But, that's kind of what I expect heading into March 14th, where they have a couple of games on the same day, one against Mount Olive and one against Barton here. As you proceed, there's going to be a lot of teams that we just don't have a ton of. We just haven't seen them in action, right? So it's going to be different. It's going to be a little bit of scaling here and there, depending on who they play. But then they got Hollins, Erskine, and Emmanuel throughout March before facing Wingate. That is an opponent with some familiar faces that we know here personally as far as Colorado talent goes. And Coach V also covered them in our very first preview episode, so go ahead and double back to that and listen to that anywhere. But continuing on, they got Mount St. Mary's, King, North Carolina Central, Gallaudet heading into April, Lise McRae, Mars Hill, and Chowan before the Conference Carolinas tournament takes place in Durham, North Carolina, April 17th through April 19th. Stay tuned for the previews on these other teams here in the Conference Carolinas. But regardless, it's going to be hard to put an exact number here on how this team is going to perform come springtime here. But they definitely have some interesting opponents. They got an interesting schedule, one that's going to be eye-opening in some ways more than others. But as it stands now, they got, 18 regular season games, it looks like, with opportunities to stream. And we're going to see, Colorado talent kind of scattered through here. And we got a Colorado guy heading the program here at Ferrum. And it will be interesting to see how they do. But regardless, we're excited to cover the Ferrum Panthers this year and, see what they can do and what their program's going to be about and what this culture is going to look like come springtime. For our next program, going to be a similar face, a familiar face, if one may, in the University of St. Mary. So we're going from the D2 level to the NAIA level to talk about KCAC teams for the remainder of this episode here. Now, for last year, St. Mary, they beat Pratt Community College to start the season very strong, 33-6. And then they got a bounce-back win against Bethel in Game 3, and then squeaked out a win against Heston, 12-6, about mid-season. The only notable loss that I'm going to argue about here is losing to Kodey here, 12-20, which I think was arguably pretty winnable, but the rest of their season just not really going the way that they necessarily wanted it to. And with that being said, I think that probably leads to a handful of these departures, at least of players that we're not going to see from last year heading into this season. Such players include the quarterbacks that they tried to roll out here. These quarterbacks, they didn't find a ton of success between Anaya Hooks and Ariana Rivera here. They combined for 7 touchdowns to 23 interceptions, which is obviously a bit brutal, but it is also brutal as a program to lose your 2 leading passers, not have the chance to develop them and grow them and whatnot there. They also lose their leading receiver, Brooklyn Hill here, who had 62 receptions for 558 yards, as well as their second leading receiver, Layla Mays here, who had about 200 yards. They also lose London Reed, who is 4th on the team in tackles. Kadeon Bennett is not coming back, and Sanaya Glover, but not the other Sanaya Glover, this Sanaya Glover, S-A-N-I-Y-A Glover, who is tied for the lead in sacks on the program. Overall, I think the thing that really sticks out to me here, worth noting, is that 6 freshmen are not currently listed on the 2026 roster that were on the 2025 roster. I don't know if they're still attending USM or if they've transferred, or, the list kind of goes on as to what they're doing next. But either way, definitely some big-time players that you are losing. But you are bringing back some consistency, mainly on the defensive side of the ball, that you hope to develop, retain, and grow here. I'm looking at Itanu McNatt here, who was the tackle leader for this defense. I'm looking at Brayley Chris, who is tied for the lead in sacks for the Spires last year as a defensive performer here. I'm looking at Valerie Chacon here, who had 3 sacks. Demi Hilton, who had 4 sacks. Also, Trinity Scott, who is one of the leading tacklers and also had 8 pass breakups, which is good here. You also have a couple of weapons coming back here. Charisma Delgado, who had 2 touchdown receptions. And then I think, honestly, most importantly here, you're getting Talia Wright back here, who is 2nd on the squad in receptions at 29, and also had 4 interceptions on the defensive side of the ball here, continuing that kind of growth on defense pattern that you're hoping to improve on. You also have some additions coming in here, like Ava Lavea here, who over her career in high school had 83 receptions for 1,329 yards and 19 touchdowns. You also have Yanela Roman Lopez here, who notched 448 yards and 6 touchdowns. Eli Miranda, who overall just was an offensive weapon here. 923 rushing yards, 1,095 receiving yards in her high school career. that added up to 19 touchdowns to go with 8 sacks as well on the defensive side of the ball. So you have some versatility as far as how you can use her, but you have some receivers coming in to try and patch up the losses of Brooklyn as well as Layla, which is good. And then you have Kendra Thomas here, who is a quarterback who steadily improved over her time in Florida, finishing her senior year with a 15 touchdown to 4 interception ratio, and also notched 440 yards on the ground. But also defensively, maybe building strength on strength is what the Spires are aspiring to do here, as she had 22 career interceptions, and 11 of those, half of them, came her senior year here. And obviously, when you have the staff that you have here in a Amber Clark, Team USA, defensive back, you got some DBs that played pretty well last year. You got some good athletes. You're bringing in a really good DB in Kendra Thomas as well. Maybe gets a user on both sides of the ball here. And then you also have our guy here, Chuck Robinson, who, shout out to him, PMC fam, and what he's able to kind of let us know from time to time as far as tournament times and just helping us out with information a lot of the time. They are going to kind of have their hands full this year as far as, picking up what they can from the quarterback position mainly is what I'm looking at, and what's going to be really tough here in a KCAC that continues to get better and more interesting at the same time. So, taking a look at their schedule here, currently their season opener is scheduled for March 4th on the road against Baker. This, unfortunately, I think is a very brutal way to start the season. Baker made a very, well, to some, surprise run, some might call it, at Nationals here. Baker, we knew that they had the talent. They just finally were able to put it together, and that was with their backup quarterback as well, pulling off some close wins over some Sun Conference squads, and just playing some other Sun Conference squads very close and giving them a scare. Baker, they're going to continue to improve. Willie Perez is a guy who I know is hungry, and Baker, they want a shot at that KCAC title, and it starts with this game against St. Mary's. So you have a very hungry squad coming in against an inexperienced quarterback, whoever that might be. And defensively, obviously, you're going to do a lot of things right. You're going to make some plays, but this Baker offense is hard to guard. It is very unique, and it is a very good, I'd say, translation of a 5s offense into the realm of 7s. They then have Heston College. Heston is brand new to the NAIA. Before, they were in that JUCO D3 kind of setup, and so Heston is going to join. They did beat Heston last year. We'll see what they're able to return and how their acclimation goes against NAIA teams, but this is potentially a win here before they host Graceland University. Graceland obviously was kind of going back and forth at some important positions last year. We'll see where they settle in this year. And then they're on the road immediately after at Kansas Wesleyan. Now, this game might be interesting. It depends on how their roster looks come springtime following the news of Melinda Nguyen here, which congratulations to Coach Nguyen for her new position, also still coaching flag football, but not at Kansas Wesleyan University. They have Chris Snyder there now, who has done a little bit of reaching out here in Colorado, which is good to see, but that doesn't get you recruits for the 2026 season. But if he's able to retain the talent on that roster, this should probably go the Yotes way, but we will see, like I said, what that looks like come springtime. Another thing that we'll probably learn as we get closer to the season is Midland. They do play Midland at home before going on the road to Kodey. This is a winnable game. I think that this game is kind of a coin toss every year. You do have athletes like Talia Wright that could really swing the momentum of this game, but that is yet to be seen. Before they host Ottawa here and Southwestern in back-to-back games, Wednesday, Saturday. Then they're on the road against William Woods, then Bethel, then at home against William Woods before traveling to Missouri to face North Central Missouri College, and then once again at home versus Kodey. So I think on the lowest end, say you split the games with Kodey, say you pick up a win between Heston and North Central. You end up with 2 wins. I think no matter what, looking at the schedule here, that's kind of the floor. On the high end here, depending on how stout this defense is, if they're able to turn turnovers into points here, you could sweep Kodey potentially, get that win over Bethel, which I also think that they should win. And then if you can collect wins against new to NAIA Heston as well as North Central Missouri College in these matchups here, then you're looking at a season where you improve in the win column here. You're looking at a season where potentially you're building something. Maybe you sneak one of these games against the heavyweights of the conference, and you get to around 6 wins. I know that's a huge window of wins here, but I just think that when you don't have that continuity at quarterback, it makes it very challenging to keep up with these established programs that do have quarterbacks that are continuing to build off of. Maybe these programs were thin last year. I mean, you look at Midland, you have another year of Ione Kayo here. If you look at K-Dub, if they're able to get a Wada out there, that's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Ottawa, despite, as I will touch on later, graduating their quarterback, they still have plenty of talent at every position, and I trust the Sauer sisters to develop a quarterback that's going to help that team compete for a national title nonetheless. So with the continuity of other places in the conference in a lot of ways, on top of the continuity that they aren't able to hold on to from last season, we'll see how this season goes. I'm saying a window of wins or a wow of 2-6 for the St. Mary Spires, but wishing them nothing but luck. And as always, would love to offer them that Colorado watch list and try and get some girls that opportunity out there. And now, probably for the headliner, as some would probably refer to this squad, we're going to talk about Ottawa, the defending only national champions of NAIA. And spoiler alert, the team that I'm going to have coming in at number 1 once we release our power rankings here. But regardless, it's the Braves here, headed by the Sauer sisters here, who have just built a perennial powerhouse, and last year was really just the peak of Ottawa in every way. They went 23-0. They beat every KCAC opponent. They beat Baker, K-Dub, and Midland, all with shutouts in the Kickoff Classic. But as time went on, these games did get a little bit closer here as they eked by Baker, not the first time 24-12, but 18-13 the second time, making that just a 1-score game. And then K-Dub, just close but no cigar for the Yotes this year. They beat K-Dub 26-18, so just a 1-score game there. Then 40-26, a little bit more cushion. And then in the KCAC Championship, 28-13, before playing them again in Nationals and squeaking by them 26-25 in double overtime. That game was absolutely electric. I loved covering that with my guy Gino, who is going to be releasing episodes in the near future. But as if that wasn't entertaining enough, they would have another double overtime thriller in the semifinal against Thomas, winning 19-13, and then beating Kaiser in the national championship 34-20. That score even feels a little bit closer than the game felt, honestly, in some ways. So Ottawa just wrapping up in dominance after, going through lots of trials and tribulations this year. And this is even amongst the great award-winning seasons from a handful of their players. Suzanne Kaufman won Rusher of the Year in 2025. Alyssa Linkus won Utility Player of the Year. Madison Carrera won Quarterback of the Year, as well as Most Valuable Playmaker last year. Just fantastic seasons all around from a ton of good players. And I think that talking about Madison Carrera is a good place to start with the departures. Madison Carrera providing stability, providing consistent, high level, even the highest level play at the quarterback position over the past few years, over this dynasty that they have built with multiple national championships here. And last season maybe have been her best as a passer, 96 touchdowns to just 9 interceptions, 5,651 yards, and 77% completion rate. There's obviously going to be spikes, and she has always been a high-level baller, but just absurd efficiency at the quarterback position with like a 10-to-1 ratio of touchdowns to interceptions, and just protecting the football and relying on her legs less while still being very deadly. 10 rushing touchdowns on the season, but not nearly the rushing yard totals that maybe we've seen in the past, because she was just so surgical, dissecting the field, getting the ball to her targets here, one of which includes Jaslyn Camacho, who's also not coming back this year. Second leading receiver with 105 receptions, 1,216 yards. The second is in yards, by the way. 23 touchdowns, and it's just one of one as far as receivers go. Jump ball specialist, very good with body control in the end zone, winning those one-on-one situations here, and definitely somebody that I would say is not easy to replace, but as far as the way that this roster has been constructed, one that if they could have maintained or replaced that at a high level, they have similar looks that they can get out of their personnel right now. Offensively, they also lose Alyssa Gillespie, but she will remain on staff, so that will provide some consistency in tutelage for the incoming players or the returning players. Defensively, you lose some studs here. Shout out to Colorado here with Leilani Kamal graduating after notching 62 tackles and 7 pass breakups. You also have long-time contributor and playmaker as far as our spotlights go in DJ Paris here. Started off at STU, transferred to Ottawa, has been a long-time contributor. This last season was no different. 89 tackles, 13 of those for loss with 9 sacks and 3 picks. Used her in a very versatile way. Super athletic, does a great job getting after the quarterback. That's going to be tough to replace. Jasmine Dunn, also 7 sacks, 9 tackles for loss last season. So losing a little bit of your pass rushers here. And then on the back end, definitely losing one of the all-time talents, at least as far as our coverage has gone in the college flag football scene, in Cynthia Holmes here. Leading tackler, 107 total tackles, but mainly the 12 interceptions and 14 pass breakups. Just has been one of the best safeties in the country since she came onto the scene at Warner. It was no different at Ottawa, and in turn finished off the season incredibly strong here, and is just, once again, another one-of-one talent similar to the likes of Madison Carrera, who we are going to miss covering and getting to see as far as on the national stage. Now, this last one here is, I don't want to say good transition here, but a noteworthy transition here, as she's still on the roster, but I doubt that they will have her for the season here, and that is going to be Addie Osborne. Addie, we do wish you a speedy recovery here, as she did suffer an ACL injury, and I just don't think that there's going to be enough time to turn around and come back, and that is honestly such an underrated loss. Not only is it a big loss as far as looking at stats potentially go, but really it's far bigger than the impact that these numbers imply. 162 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, and then you look at her 75 receptions for 721 yards and 10 touchdowns. But really, it is just the best blocker checkdown utility option in the country was Addie Osborne, as far as what she was able to provide, that any checkdown she could turn into a big gain. Very elusive, best blocker in the country, in my opinion. And, also a Team USA contributor at the rusher position, and it just sucks for a million reasons to see this injury, but we do hope for a speedy recovery and hope to see her on the gridiron sooner than later, back at full capacity, tearing it up. But so she'll be in more of a different kind of role this season as far as her injury goes. And so hopefully she recovers fast. But offensively, you do still have a lot of consistency for whoever takes over at the quarterback position. You got Marley Spielberg, a fantastic safety blanket here, 110 receptions for 944 yards, 19 touchdowns, putting in great work out of the slot position. You also bring back, as we mentioned earlier, the utility player of the year in Alyssa Linkus, 1,512 yards and 30 touchdowns as the lead receiver. Just does things at the center position that not many, if any, other athletes have been able to do on the NAIA level, and will continue to provide that security and just that technique and professionalism that she brings to that position, and just clocks in, gets it done, clocks out. You also got Jada Bayron here, 675 yards on 65 receptions, could expand into a bigger role, but I'm really looking at Tatiana Dos Santos here, 718 yards on 65 receptions with 10 touchdowns. I think that she's going to be asked to fill that Camacho role just a little bit more as we head further into the season and be that one-on-one tall mismatch on the outside here. Now, I don't want to talk about quarterbacks quite yet here, but defensively, you bring back Sanaya Glover, Si'Naya Glover, who had 35 tackles and 5 picks last year. Jukani Washington, who had a fantastic national championship showing, and her season reflects that a little bit. 70 tackles, 7 interceptions, great play in the secondary. You also got Maya Quinn with 6 picks. You got Bethany Uribe with 23 tackles and 4 picks with 5 pass breakups here. And Talia McInnes, another great cornerback, 6 interceptions and 39 tackles. So that defensive secondary, despite losing Cynthia, is still going to be very powerful on the back end here. And also, despite losing some good pass rushers here, you still bring back some solid ones here. I'm looking at Kiara Nixon, who's probably going to expand into a bigger role with Paris gone. But truly, Suzanne Kaufman, who was voted as our rusher of the year, is going to continue to just be one of the most prominent players in the country. 77 tackles, 20 of those for loss, and 15 sacks to go with 3 interceptions, as her coverage has only continued to get better and better through the years, showing blitz and then getting back to her spot, reading the quarterback's eyes, knowing what the offense is going to run, and just playing with great instincts that she had at the rusher position and has only been expanded at linebacker here with the Sauer sisters here at Ottawa. So that is, and also just another high energy kind of athlete here who's going to get the team fired up by making plays. They got a few new faces this year as well. I'm looking at Olga Sotillo here, who comes in with a ton of tackle and flag experience on the big stages out of Spain here. She's got strong hands and adds to the long list of weapons on this Ottawa team here. So just continuing to build depth. They also bring in Casey Hart, high-level athlete with insane speed and good hands. Could be a very big yak target for Ottawa here, and had a ton of offers on the table before the Braves swooped in and brought it home. I'm talking Thomas, I'm talking Lisa McRae, I'm talking University of St. Mary's. I mean, there are a ton of schools that had eyes on this athlete, and Casey's going to give her heart to the Braves this year. They also bring in Jalen Jensen, 37 receptions for 716 yards and 11 touchdowns her senior year, but 12 interceptions is what really caught my eye. I wonder if this is the type of athlete that you bring in to try and alleviate a little bit of the hurt from losing a Cynthia Holmes here, and if that is the plan or what they will do here. Now, quarterback, I kind of left this as a blended section because I do think it's very interesting. On the roster from last year, you have Olivia Cadiz as well as Kaylee Verhoeven here. Both of them had a couple of pass attempts. Cadiz was the big one here with a 10 touchdown to 4 interception ratio with 446 yards on 61% completion in the action that she saw. And then obviously Kaylee here is on the roster listed at quarterback trying to compete, listed at 6'1" here. Could potentially see the field super duper well, but I think it is worth talking about one of the signings that they had, somebody who's coming in to this roster here who could really make some noise. Now, obviously, they have other players listed, like Jada Bayron also has quarterback listed as a position for her. But I'm looking at Anna Anderson here, the 2025 NFL Flag Player of the Year finalist, who made the U17 Team USA squad, QB'd for the KC Shockers, and in a way kind of gets to stay home with Ottawa and develop her talent here and her skills under a coaching staff that has worked with high-level talent here. And, looking at her highlights, she could be something very, very special and some quarterback play that could potentially keep them around for even longer. Now, she's also listed at receiver. You got Marley Spielberg here, who's listed at receiver as well as quarterback here. So I think that, we're supposed to be guessing a little bit here. So Tio has quarterback listed there as well. Obviously, it is kind of the Ottawa way to recruit very versatile players and maybe repurpose them, lest anyone forget Carrera did not start off as a quarterback and was developed into the best quarterback in the country for stretches and times, and maybe even historically speaking, once we start looking at PMC Hall of Fame and Flag Football Hall of Fame stuff. But that being said here, it will be interesting to see who takes over. Whoever steps into that quarterback spot is going to have some of the best weapons in the entire country, if not the best weapons in the entire country, front to bottom. Going to have a really good defense that's going to get it done on that side of the ball and provide opportunities, whether it be with turnovers, short fields, or just, holding the other team to low totals here. You're going to have a little bit of wiggle room here, but I do know that Liz holds the highest expectations for those quarterbacks and will bring out the absolute best, but will also expect the absolute best out of her quarterback play. So very interested to see who they play here on the schedule and who is going to be playing quarterback for this squad. Now, there are some very interesting games immediately. They start off with this, I'm assuming, a tournament or invite of some kind in Georgia, where they are going to play Kaiser. Now, historically speaking, right, Kaiser, this is a team that they have bested in the national championship a handful of times. I know that some people might use the word rivalry, and Kaiser's going to be hungry because you got to win sometimes for that rivalry to stay alive. Kaiser, one of the most prominent programs in the country, but definitely very electric. One game that I hope to be tuning into despite it being on a Thursday. But they also follow that up with Wingate. Simon is very, very high on Wingate. Go ahead and listen to his preview as to why, but that game could be potentially interesting before they come back to some KCAC action. Not really worried about Bethel. Southwestern, I just don't think is quite there yet. We'll see how many roster spots they were able to fill, but they really just, depth is the biggest concern for Southwestern here. So depending on how deep they are and who else they were able to bring. But despite all that, I'm still fairly confident in Ottawa's ability to pull off a win here, especially since both of these games are at home. Now, worst case scenario, I think that are 3-1 heading into this 3-11 game, which is very funny. And this is going to be on the road at Baker University. Circle this on your calendars, Wednesday at 6 p.m. I think that's probably Central Time, so 5 p.m. our time for Colorado. And then obviously I want to say that's 7 p.m. for y'all on the East Coast. This is a big, big game. A couple of teams that you could potentially see at Nationals, since that is invite only now. So do pay attention to that. And this is a Baker team that's very hungry for that win. They played Ottawa very, very close the last couple of times that they did play. They had a good showing at Nationals. They're continuing to build off of that with their recruiting, with the players that they bring back. But all of that being said, we will see what will happen here between this Wildcat and Ottawa game. They're then on the road in Iowa against Graceland and then face Kodey here. I think at worst in that little 3-game stretch, at worst if Baker pulls off an upset, it would be earlier in the season as opposed to later in the season. And so that makes them maybe 5-2, but also very easily could be 7-0. They play Kansas Wesleyan at home. I don't want to sound like a doubter or a hater on Coach Snyder. Obviously, he's coaching at the highest level for a reason here. It'll just be interesting to see what this team looks like schematically, roster-wise, personnel-wise, and execution-wise at K-Dub here. This is also at home for Ottawa, so I am going to pick them to win that one. They're then on the road at the University of St. Mary, then at home against Midland and Heston. I think they rack up wins along that little stretch, and then have a couple more games on the road at William Woods and Kansas Wesleyan. I was deciding between K-Dub and Kansas Wesleyan. So, and then all of that leads into the KCAC tournament. This honestly could be another undefeated year. At worst, I think that this team maybe loses 2 games during the regular season, but I don't recall maybe 2 years ago that happened. Maybe where they lost they lost 4 games back in 2024, but I mean they still ended up as national champs that year. They only lost 1 game in 2023. I mean, we are just talking about one of the most dominant sports programs that we've maybe ever witnessed across any sport. I mean, honest to goodness here, since this program started recording wins and losses back in 2021, they've only had a few losses. They haven't even reached double-digit losses yet in their program history. So if that doesn't tell you just the level of excellence that this program operates with, the expectation that the Sauer sisters have on their players, the level of talent that they bring in, and how they grow and develop that talent and utilize it in creative ways, I just don't know what to tell you. They have 8 total losses over the past few years. They are the only national champions on the NAIA level, and that's going to continue to be the case until someone else proves themselves here. I'm not one to bet against Ottawa here, and hopefully everyone has learned their lesson here as they head into this next season trying to defend that crown that only they have held. But that will do it for this episode, folks. Thank you so much for listening here. Once again, please do stay tuned as we are back. We are back in full strength. We're going to have more of these previews coming out via myself, Gino, or Coach V. Listen to the other ones if you haven't already. We're painting a huge picture. We're getting together an awesome committee of voters for our power ranking segment, including former players, and getting them to also be involved in our end of year awards stuff that we're going to figure out how to tackle. We're collaborating with other great organizations that are doing their absolute best to cover all of these programs across every single level. The sport only continues to grow. The talent only continues to develop, and we are here for it every step of the way and hope to see y'all around as we continue to grow and develop the game of flag football. We do post basically everywhere, mainly Instagram at Playmakers Corner. We're also on Facebook, Playmakers Corner. We are on Twitter/X at Playmaker Corner. So be sure to check all those out. Subscribe to our YouTube where these episodes do go. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, I think Amazon, everywhere that's evil and everywhere that is good, we are on that platform. So thank you so much for the support, sticking around. Follow, subscribe, like, notifications on, all that jazz, and continue to stay tuned for more action. I have been your host for this episode, Kodey Stauffer, signing off. Peace.